Hello, everybody. Hello, YouTube. How are you? Good to see you again. This is bullshit, theoretical, or at least that's what it would be if you were to find me in the context of a 5th grade classroom. This is going to be a follow-up to my last video, Everything in His Power. Really, this is a video response to Dr. Seuss RE14. I got a couple of video responses to that Everything in His Power video, but this one seems to stand out the most, and the other one that I got tends to kind of say the same thing. So hopefully I'll be killing two birds with one stone. But the video this is a follow-up to my video, Everything in His Power. I basically just ask, do you as a Christian maintain that God has done everything in His power to prevent us from getting ourselves sent to hell? And Dr. Seuss RE, your answer was essentially yes. Yes, God has done everything He can outside of violating human free will, since, as you put it, God cannot force anyone into or out of hell. But I have a really big favor to ask you. Before I move on with anything in this video, there's another video I did. It's called Nonbelief and Peek-A-Boo. And this goes for anybody watching this video if you have the time and the patience. And I'm gonna put the link right here. But if you haven't seen that video of mine, Nonbelief and Peek-A-Boo, you have to watch it before you watch the rest of this video, because I'm gonna sort of use that as a cliff note, and a lot of the statements that I make here are going to be predicated on the logic I use there. And so if you're watching this and you haven't seen that, a lot of what I say here might seem arbitrary or unfounded, or, so press pause or do whatever you got to do, go watch that video, and then come back. I'll wait right now, I'll wait right here, awkwardly. Did I forget to buy milk? Okay, glad you're back. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. You said a lot of things in your video, and instead of trying to address everything you said point by point, I'm going to see if I can take one of the things you said, one of the points you made, and talk about that a lot and elaborate on it enough to hopefully cover sort of everything you said in a roundabout kind of passive-aggressive way. It seems risky, I know, but I'm going to go for it. Here's what you said. You said that God has made 3 bits of information available to everyone. 1, that everyone willfully malfunctions against God, other humans, and others in God's created order. 2, that God exists and is all-powerful, all-good, and all-knowing. And 3, that God has provided a way to restore us back to proper function. Now, I'm assuming that a source, if not the source, for these bits of information is the Bible. But I want to ask you something, and this is important. What do you consider information? Is it information only under the supposition that it's true, or are you granting such a thing as false information? For example, you obviously believe that Islam makes a bunch of false claims about God, but would you still consider the Quran a source of information of some kind? Because if you do, then so what? If God made certain pieces of information available to us. If information can be false, then these 3 propositions you just gave are useless to us in terms of our salvation, since we have no way of distinguishing them from the claims of any other false religion. If God exists, has He provided us with the knowledge that this information is not false information? No. As human beings, we don't know that the propositions you listed are true. In fact, if we did, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. All we do know is that there's a religion which exists, which claims that these things are true. But that does us no good at all when there's so many religions in the world making so many different claims. Now, why am I making such a big deal out of this? It's because an all-powerful God could grant each and every person not just the information, but the knowledge that your propositions 1, 2, and 3 are true. Now, in my Nonbelief and Peek-A-Boo video, which hopefully you've seen already if you're watching this, I demonstrated that ignorance that the claims of Christianity are actually true is something that causes most people not to be saved, and thus go to hell. So here's a perfect example of one thing, a huge thing, actually, that God could do, which would prevent many human beings from going to hell, but which God has obviously not done. Now, the other thing I demonstrated with my non-belief video was that the free will defense, while it may be in some ways applicable to like the problem of evil, It doesn't apply here. It would be a non sequitur, since the apprehension of knowledge never has and never will negate freedom of choice. Not only could God grant each and every person knowledge that these pivotal facts about Christianity are true, but he could also do so without compromising his additional desire for us to have free will. You want me to prove that he can do it? Sure. Fallen angels. Think about it, mull it over. Did you get there? You believe that God has already created another kind of conscious, sentient being which have the freedom to deny and rebel against him, and which can and have done so, all the while knowing with unquestionable certainty that God exists and has the attributes he has. So, the bottom line you've been waiting for. There is at least one action which, without violating free will, would prevent many human beings from ending up in hell. But this action has not been performed. Therefore, either God can't perform this action, in which case he isn't all-powerful, or God hasn't done everything in his power to keep us from going to hell. And that's really all there is to it. But it's not just that. That's just one example. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I think God could do, which would not be a violation of free will, that God has not done. This all under the assumption that the Christian God exists, you know. For example, and I'm just going to list you a few things that I typed out before this video. Isn't it true that God had the power not to create Lucifer, which he knew would ultimately be a source of temptation for human beings to sin? Isn't it true that God had the power to prevent the serpent from tempting Adam and Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge, thus causing the fall of man? Or not create the serpent in the first place? Or not create the tree in the first place? Or create Adam and Eve with full knowledge of right and wrong from the beginning, so that they would have known that disobeying God was something that was wrong? Isn't it true that God had the power to arrange that each and every human being was born with a clean slate, like he did with Adam and Eve, rather than a sinful nature we can't escape or transcend? Isn't it true that God has the power to remove our souls from existence altogether, rather than allowing those souls to suffer an unimaginable torment that never, ever, ever ends? Isn't it true that God has the power to contemporarily and consistently perform epic miracles for the world to see, rather than conveniently ceasing to perform these miracles altogether by the time human science and communication were advanced enough to document, share, playback, and verify them? Isn't it true that God has the power to flat out appear to each and every one of us individually and answer whatever questions we might have to relieve any possible confusion or doubt? Isn't it true that God has the power to employ his omniscience in such a way as to discern which human beings are truly rejecting or rebelling against him, and which simply don't realize that Christianity isn't just another crazy religion? Isn't it true that God has the power to provide us with an infinitely more impressive holy book than the one we currently have for Christianity, in which we aren't forced to rely on generations of altered and edited copies of unclear, internally inconsistent accounts from anonymous, non-eyewitnesses reported 30 years after the events they describe even took place in an entirely different language? I mean, it really seems as if the Christian God, if he's out there, is going out of his way to make his own existence an easily debatable, easily questionable, and easily doubtable proposition, don't you? And that really wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the fact that the system God seems to have set up is predicated upon sending people to hell for not accepting Jesus as their Savior, when the only reason most of them don't is because they didn't know that this version of God exists, or that they've committed any crimes against him which necessitate a salvation. I mean, I'm going to close with this. I'm just going to reiterate the question in light of these things. And be as intellectually honest as you can. Isn't it true? Isn't it true that God has not, if he does exist, that God has not done everything in his power to prevent us from ending up in hell? Isn't it true? Okay, thanks.